The metallic screech of the iron gates opening echoed through the Blood Moon territory, followed by the terrifying, deafening silence of an entire army holding their breath. Alpha King Kaelin of Ashveil, the most lethal predator on the continent, was not leading a siege. He was standing completely alone, barefoot in the freezing mud, with his hands empty, a paradox that made the rival sentinels tremble. Above him, 20 silver-tipped crossbows were aimed directly at his heart. The rival commander sneered, tossing an hourglass onto the dirt. "You have exactly 6 seconds to explain why you crossed our borders, Ashveil. When the sand runs out, we fill you with silver, king or not. But before we witness the blood that is about to spill, you need to ask yours, why would a supreme alpha willing walk into a death trap? Keep listening until the very end, because the answer is about to shatter an empire. And do not forget to subscribe to Wolf Enigma so you never miss a tale of dark romance and ultimate revenge." The sand began to slip through the glass, a ticking clock toward an execution. Yet, King Kaelin did not flinch. He did not look at the weapons. He did not look at the commander. His glowing, silver eyes were fixed solely on the dilapidated infirmary across the courtyard. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding as he pulled the frigid air into his lungs. He was drowning in regret, starving for a scent he had cruelly cast away exactly 5 years ago. He was not here to conquer a territory. He was here to beg. He had finally felt the agonizing, suffocating reality of the severed mate bond, a delayed punishment for his absolute arrogance. And as the final grains of sand fell, the wooden door of the infirmary slowly creaked open, revealing a tiny silhouette that made the Alpha King's heart stop entirely. The wooden floors of the Blood Moon infirmary were perpetually stained with rust-colored shadows. For 5 years, Maren had scrubbed those boards until her hands bled and her knuckles cracked, erasing the violence of a pack that despised her existence. She was a ghost in this territory, a nameless Omega allowed to breathe their air only because she possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of healing herbs and a willingness to do the grueling, unsanitary labor no one else wanted. The Blood Moon territory was a desolate wasteland of jagged rocks and perpetual winter. Alpha Thorn ruled with a philosophy of absolute cruelty, where the weak were left to freeze and the strong took whatever they desired. Maren was placed at the very bottom of this vicious hierarchy. She slept on a thin, rotting mat stuffed with dried pine needles in a supply closet completely devoid of heat. On the days when food was scarce, the pack members threw her spoiled scraps meant for the hunting hounds, laughing as she quiet-washed the gristle in freezing water just to feed her growing boy. She endured the mockery, the occasional shove in the icy mud, and the spit at her feet with a blank, unreadable expression. Her pride had not been broken, it had simply been weaponized into sheer, impenetrable endurance. She did not end up in this miserable squalor by accident. She chose it over the alternative. The memory of the Ashveil court was a cold phantom that haunted her quietest moments. She remembered the opulent marble halls, the suffocating scent of absolute power, and Kaelin, King Kaelin. He had stood before her, a towering monument of authority and glacial indifference. It was exactly 3 days before the ancient lunar cycle would have cemented their fated mate bond, locking their souls together for eternity. Instead, He had looked down at her with eyes like frozen steel. "You are not my mate," he had declared, his voice devoid of any emotion, echoing through the silent throne room. A king acquires a weapon by his side, not a fragile liability. The bond is a mistake. I reject it. Most wolves would have collapsed. They would have wept, clawed at their chests, and begged the moon goddess for mercy. Maren did none of those things. She simply looked at the man who was meant to be her other half, nodded once, and turned her back on the greatest empire in the world. She packed a single linen bag, slipped past the border guards under the cover of a moonless night, and walked until the soles of her boots fell apart. When a mate bond is rejected, the physical toll is usually fatal, driving the victim to madness or suicide. Maren survived the agonizing fire in her veins by anchoring her sanity to the tiny, secret heart she had discovered fluttering inside her womb just days before the rejection. By the time the third day arrived, the day the severed bond would finally strike Kaelin with the catastrophic, delayed force of a dying star, Maren was already a ghost. She was already inside the hostile borders of the Blood Moon Pack, trading her dignity for a dark corner in a drafty medical ward. Now, that secret was 5 years old. Leo was a quiet child, inheriting his mother's devastating patience. He sat on a wooden crate in the corner of the infirmary, meticulously wrapping a linen bandage around a splintered stick. He wore threadbare clothes, patched together from discarded scraps, his small frame shivering whenever the bitter wind howled through the cracked window panes. Yet, despite the extreme poverty, despite the dirt smudged on his pale cheeks, he possessed an unnatural gravity. While the Blood Moon children were feral and loud, constantly fighting for dominance in the dirt, Leo was profoundly observant. He moved with a calculated grace that belonged in a royal palace, not a blood-soaked slaughterhouse. It was in those rare moments when the harsh Blood Moon wolves entered the ward, barking orders and baring their teeth, that the cryptic truth of his lineage slipped out. A wounded, rabid dire wolf had broken free from its iron restraints 3 weeks ago, snapping its massive jaws and lunging straight for Maren. Before the beast could strike, little Leo had stepped in front of his mother. He did not scream. He did not flinch. He merely looked at the massive animal and whispered a single, resonant word: "Stop." The dire wolf had instant frozen, its primal instincts violently overridden by an ancient, royal frequency embedded in the child's vocal cords. It whimpered, dropped to its belly, and bowed its head to the dirt. Maren had quickly dragged Leo away, terrified that the Blood Moon Alpha would discover what she was harboring. A child who could command beasts with a whisper was a massive threat. A child with the unmistakable, luminous silver eyes of the Ashveil bloodline was an immediate death sentence. For 5 years, Maren had strictly taught Leo to look down, to hide his piercing gaze beneath a ragged wool cap, and to never speak of the father who threw them away like garbage. "Some wolves," she had told him softly one evening as they shared a stale, freezing crust of bread, "never realize what they have until they have lost the ability to reach it. And when they finally come back, they find that the world has moved on without them." Leo had simply nodded, striking silver eyes understand far more than a child ever should. He had absorbed the lesson of absolute patience. And now, as the shouting in the courtyard outside reached a fever pitch. Maren wiped the grime from her forehead. She heard the metallic clatter of heavy crossbows being drawn. She heard the mocking laughter of Alpha Thorn's sentinels. Carefully, she pushed open the heavy wooden door of the infirmary, stepping out into the biting winter cold. She held Leo's small, freezing hand firmly in hers. She did not know what fool was trespassing on Blood Moon soil this morning, but she knew she had to protect her son at all costs. As the door swung wide, the frigid wind whipped her dark hair across her face, and her tired, stoic eyes finally met the center of the courtyard. The courtyard of the Blood Moon Pack was a frozen, hostile arena, but to Alpha King Kalen, the armed guards, the drawn crossbows, and the sneering commander had entirely ceased to exist. His heightened predatory senses were completely tunneled on the heavy wooden door of the infirmary. The wind howled across the jagged rocks, carrying the bitter stench of wet fur and rusted iron. But then, the wind suddenly shifted. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and a singular, delicate scent sliced through the toxic air. It was the scent of rain-soaked cedar, crushed wild jasmine, and the faint, sweet warmth of vanilla. It was a fragrance that Kalen had spent the last 5 years hunting in his nightmares. The moment the scent hit his olfactory glands, the reaction was instantaneous and violently physical. An electrical shock, raw and blindingly hot, ripped down his spine. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a catastrophic collision of souls. The ancient magic of the mate bond, which had been bleeding out like an open, festering wound for half a decade, suddenly roared to life with terrifying force. Deep within the massive expanse of Kalen's chest, a sound began to vibrate. It was a low, guttural, primal purr, a sound of absolute possession and profound relief that he had not made since the day he foolishly rejected his destiny. His inner wolf, which had been pacing in agonizing, suicidal despair within the cage of his mind, threw self against his ribs, howling for the woman stepping out of the shadows. The severed connection between them frantically attempted to suture itself back together, sending waves of dizzying, intoxicating heat through his freezing veins. Through the biting snow, Kellen finally laid eyes on her. Maren. The air left his lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The majestic, fierce woman he remembered from the Ashveil court was hidden beneath layers of brutal degradation. He saw her threadbare, patched clothes that offered no protection against the winter. He saw the harsh, red cracks on her knuckles from years of agonizing labor. He saw the dark, exhausted shadows bruised beneath her beautiful eyes. She was a queen, born to wear crowns of silver and silk, but she had been reduced to a starving servant in a hostile wasteland. And it was entirely his fault. The crushing weight of his catastrophic arrogance hit him like a physical blow. He had called her a fragile liability. He had cast her away because he thought absolute power required absolute isolation. Looking at her now, standing tall and fiercely protective despite the squalor, he realized she was the strongest creature he had ever encountered. He took a desperate, involuntary step forward, the primal urge to drop to his knees and wrap his arms around her waist nearly override his consciousness. He wanted to bury his face in her neck, to inhale her scent, to beg until his vocal cords tore. But before he could speak, before he could even utter her name, his silver eyes tracked downward. Standing half-hidden behind Maren's tattered skirt, a small hand was gripping the fabric of her dress. The child stepped out in the open, positioning him slightly in front of his mother in a heartbreaking, instinctive stance of protection. Kalen froze. The blood in his veins turned to solid ice. The boy was small, malnourished, and dressed in rags that hung loosely off his fragile frame. He possessed the delicate, elegant nose and the soft jawline of his mother. But as the freezing wind whipped across the courtyard, it blew the ragged wool cap back from the child's forehead, forcing the boy to look up directly at the towering Alpha King. Kalen stopped breathing. The entire world tilted on its axis. The gravity of the universe suddenly centralized on this tiny, shivering boy. The child was looking at him with luminous, piercing, unmistakable silver eyes. They were not just any silver. They were the exact, mesmerizing shade of a winter moon reflecting off a frozen lake. It was the genetic, undeniable signature of the Ashveil throne. It was the mirror of Kalen's own soul. The horrific mathematics of the timeline crashed in the Alpha King's mind with the force of a falling mountain. 5 years. She had left exactly 5 years ago. The boy standing in the freezing mud, shivering in the hostile territory of his greatest enemies, was exactly the right age. Kalen did not just reject his mate that day in the marble throne room. He had rejected his pregnant mate. He had looked his fated Luna in the eyes, shattered her soul, and cast her out in the wilderness while she was secretly carrying his flesh and blood. He had forced the woman he was born to protect to walk across continents, alone and heartbroken, to give birth to the royal heir of Ashveil in a filthy, freezing supply closet. A choked, agonizing sound escaped Kalen's throat. It was a sound of absolute, soul-tearing devastation. His hands, lethal weapons that had snapped the necks of rival alphas, began to tremble uncontrollably. He stared at his son, the heir to the greatest empire on the continent, dressed in scraps meant for hunting hounds. But what broke the Alpha King completely was not the poverty. It was the boy's expression. Leo did not look at Kalen with the fearful awe that every other creature displayed. He did not cower, nor did he cry. Instead, the 5-year-old boy looked at his father with a devastating, eerie patience. It was the specific, haunting look of a child who had been taught that the world was cruel, that promises were empty, and that the man standing before him was the architect of their misery. Leo just stared, his silver eyes holding a quiet, judgmental gravity that pierced straight through Kalen's impenetrable armor, right into his bleeding heart. Beside the boy, Maren stood perfect still. She did not flinch, and she did not offer for a single word of comfort or explanation. Her face was a mask of cold, beautiful stone. She simply held her son's hand tighter, creating an impenetrable wall of silence that screamed louder than any weapon in the courtyard. The Alpha King had finally found his family, but looking into their cold, unyielding eyes, he realized he was standing on the edge of an abyss that he had dug with his own hands. The heavy, iron-reinforced doors of the main packhouse swung open, slamming against the stone walls with a deafening crash. Alpha Thorn stepped out on the elevated wooden balcony. He wore a thick, luxurious cloak of black bear fur, his broad chest puffed out with the arrogant confidence of a tyrant who believed he had just cornered a god. He looked down at the courtyard, a cruel, mocking smile twisting his scarred face. He saw King Kaelin, the legendary conqueror of the southern territories, standing barefoot and shivering in the mud. The sight filled Thorn with a dangerous, intoxicating hubris. "Well, look at this profound tragedy," Thorn's voice boomed across the silent, frozen courtyard. He leaned over the wooden railing, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "The supreme king of Ashveil, the monster who burned the Eastern Rebellion to ash. Here you are, standing in my dirt without a single soldier at your back. Have you finally lost your mind, Kaelin? Or did you just come to my territory to die?" Kaelin did not answer. He did not even look up at the balcony. His silver eyes remained locked tightly on Maren and the tiny, shivering boy hiding behind her skirts. Thorn followed the king's gaze. The blood moon Alpha squinted through the falling snow, his eyes landing on the ragged woman who cleaned his infirmary floors. A harsh, barking laugh erupted from his chest. "You cannot be serious. You crossed the border for her. For the mute scrubber who eats my hound's leftovers. I knew you were arrogant, Kaelin, but I never knew you were pathetic." Maren stood perfectly still. Her face remained a mask of flawless, unyielding stone. She pulled Leo slight closer to her leg, her maternal instincts screaming as the attention of the entire armed garrison turned towards them. Thorn descended the wooden stairs, his heavy boots crunching against the frost. He walked into the courtyard, flanked by his massive, heavily armed sentinels. He circled Maren, looking at her with absolute disgust. She wandered into my lands 5 years ago, begging for shelter like a stray dog. I let her clean the blood out of the floorboards. But you... Thorn paused, his eyes narrowing as he finally looked down at the child clinging to Maren's dress. The wind blew again. The boy looked up. Thorn saw the eyes, the luminous, piercing, unmistakable silver eyes of the royal Ashveil bloodline. The courtyard went deathly quiet. The realization hit Alpha Thorn like a lightning strike. The mockery vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a ravenous, greedy ambition. This was not just a stray woman. This was the king's mate. And the boy in the rags was the sole heir to the greatest empire on the continent. Thorn possessed the ultimate leverage. He held the key to holding the Ashveil kingdom hostage for the rest of eternity. Thorn turned to his commander, his voice dropping into lethal, venomous command. "Take the boy. Lock him in the iron vault beneath the armory. And break the mother's legs. I want her crawling on the ground so she cannot try to run." The commander drew a heavy steel blade and stepped toward Maren. That was the exact second the universe fractured. The king snapped. The guilt vanished. The heartbreak evaporated. The crippling remorse that had paralyzed Kaelin was instantly incinerated by an eruption of pure, unadulterated, apocalyptic wrath. The ancient, Primordial beast sleeping inside the Alpha King woke up. He moved. He did not walk. He did not run. The laws of physics simply ceased to apply. One height. Kalen was standing 30 feet away. The next millisecond, the air displaced with a sonic crack, and he was standing directly in front of Maren. The Blood Moon commander reached out to grab the boy. His hand never touched the child. Kalen intercepted the commander's wrist. He squeezed. The sound of solid bone turning to dust echoed like a gunshot. The commander opened his mouth to scream. Kalen did not let him. With a casual, terrifying flick of his wrist, the Alpha King launched the 300-pound commander through the air. The man flew backward, crashing through the solid stone wall of the infirmary. He did not get up. The courtyard erupted into chaos. "Fire!" Thorn screamed, stumbling backward in sudden terror. "Shoot him!" 20 silver, tipped crossbow bolts tore through the freezing air. They were aimed directly at Kalen's chest. They never reached him. The temperature in the courtyard plummeted to absolute zero. The ground violently shook. A shockwave of pure, dominant alpha aura exploded from Kalen's body. It was not just energy. It was a physical, crushing gravity. The sheer force of his supernatural pressure hit the incoming arrows, shattering the wooden shafts in mid-air. Silver dust rained down on the snow. The Blood Moon sentinels froze. Their inner wolves whimpered. Their knees buckled. Kalen stepped forward. His silver eyes were no longer sorrowful. They were glowing with blinding, lethal radiation. Shadows seemed to violently detach from the walls, wrapping around his arms like thick, living smoke. "Kill him," Thorn shrieked, drawing his own broadsword. The royal guards charged. Kalen met them like a hurricane of death. He was a blur of supernatural violence. Short, brutal, unstoppable. A guard swung a heavy battle axe. Kalen ducked, grabbed the man by the throat, and slammed him into the frozen earth. The ground cracked like a spiderweb beneath the impact. 2 more wolves lunged from the sides, shifting to their massive beast forms mid-air. Kalen did not flinch. He caught the first wolf by the jaw, reversing its momentum, and threw the massive beast into the second. They crashed in the iron gates with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across the pristine white snow. Armor buckled like tin foil. Weapons snapped like dry twigs. It was not a battle. It was a cinematic, terrifying execution. Kalen did not draw a weapon. He was the weapon. He moved with the precision of a master assassin and the raw, cataclysmic power of a natural disaster. He shattered ribs with a single palm strike. He tore heavy iron shields in half with his bare hands. Every step he took towards Alpha Thorn left a trail of broken, unconscious bodies in his wake. The remaining Blood Moon soldiers dropped their weapons. They fell to their hands and knees, pressing their foreheads into the freezing mud. The psychological weight of Kalen's dominant aura was too massive. It was crushing their lungs. It was demanding absolute, unconditioned submission. Alpha Thorn was left standing entirely alone. His army was decimated in less than 60 seconds. The tyrannical ruler of the north was shaking uncontrollably. His forecloak felt suffocating. He dropped his broadsword. It clattered uselessly against the stones. He tried to shift into his wolf form, desperate to flee, but his muscles locked in pure, primal terror. Kalen stood before him. The Alpha King's chest heaved. His knuckles were coated in the blood of Thorn's best soldiers. The shadows twist around Kalen's shoulders, make him look like a towering, invincible god of war. Kalen reached out. He wrapped his massive hand around Alpha Thorn's throat. He lifted the screaming, thrashing Alpha entirely off the ground with one arm. Thorn kicked his legs, clawing frantically at Kalen's iron grip, gasping for air that would never come. Kalen's glowing silver eyes burned into Thorn's terrified face. "You ordered my mate to be crippled," Kalen whispered. The voice was demonic. It echoed with the overlap resonance of his monstrous inner beast. "You threaten my son." Kalen tightened his grip. The sound of Thorn's windpipe fracturing was the only noise left in the dead, silent courtyard. The threat was neutralized. The wrath was absolute. The Alpha King had reclaimed his territory, not by drawing borders, but by rewriting the rules of survival in blood. Kalen released his grip, but he did not grant Thorn the mercy of a quick death. Instead, the Alpha King channeled a concentrated, devastating pulse of pure dominance straight into Thorn's chest. The spiritual impact was catastrophic. The Blood Moon Pack watched in absolute horror as the tether connecting Thorn to his inner wolf violently shattered. Thorn collapsed into the freezing mud, clutching his chest and sobbing uncontrollably. He was no longer an alpha. He was permanently stripped of his supernatural strength, his rank, and his mind. "Take him to the northern wastelands," Kalen commanded the trembling Blood Moon survivors, his voice echoing like thunder across the jagged mountains. "Leave him there. Let him freeze in the exact same manner he forced my family to freeze." The remaining guards scrambled to obey, dropping their weapons and dragging their broken, weeping former leader out of the courtyard. The threat was eradicated. The violence ceased. Kalen stood in the center of the devastated courtyard, surrounded by the groaning bodies of the enemies he had crushed. Blood dripped steadily from his knuckles, staining the pristine snow. The terrifying, demonic shadows that had wrapped around his broad shoulders slowly dissipated into the winter air. Then, the Alpha King turned around. The monstrous god of war vanished entirely. The violent storm in his silver eyes was instantly replaced by an ocean of unbearable, agonizing sorrow. Maren was still standing in the exact same spot, her hand resting protectively on Leo's shoulder. She had watched the entire massacre with the same stoic, unread-up expression she had worn for 5 grueling years. Kalen took a slow, heavy step toward her. His massive chest heaved. With every step he took, the terrifying predator dissolved, leaving only a desperate, broken man. He stopped a few feet away from them. He looked at her cracked, bleeding hands. He looked at the thin, ragged dress that offered absolutely no warmth against the biting wind. He looked at his son, who was wearing patched shoes that were falling apart at the seams. The guilt was a physical, crushing weight. It shattered his knees. Right there, in the middle of the blood, stained, freezing mud, in front of the entire surviving Blood Moon pack, the Supreme King of Ashveil dropped to the ground. The impact of his knees hitting the dirt echoed through the silent courtyard. He did not care about his royal status. He did not care about the cold seeping into his bones. He looked up at Maren, and the first tears he had shed in his entire adult life cut through the dirt and blood on his face. "I was a fool," Kaelin whispered. His voice was hoarse, completely shattered by years of agonizing regret. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I thought power was found in isolation. I thought a crown made me invincible. But the moment I told you to leave, my soul began to rot. I have spent every single day of the last 5 years bleeding out in a throne room that felt like a tomb." He bowed his head, his broad shoulders shaking with the physical force of his sobs. "You survived the unsurvivable. You protected our son when I threw you to the wolves. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I do not deserve to breathe the same air as you. But I am begging you, Maren, punish me. Torture me. Strip me of my crown and my title. Just please. Please let me bring you home. Let me spend the rest of my miserable life washing the dirt from your feet." Maren looked down at the massive, terrifying king who was now weeping at her feet. The emotional whiplash was absolute. The man who had once stood in an opulent marble hall and coldly declared her a fragile liability was now begging for his life in the mud, completely at her mercy. Slowly, little Leo stepped out from behind his mother's skirt. Kaelin held his breath. He looked up at the boy, his own silver eyes meeting the exact same brilliant reflection. Kaelin extended a shaking, blood-stained hand, but he stopped inches away from the child's frayed coat, terrified that his violent, dirty hands would somehow corrupt the boy's purity. Leo looked at Kaelin's shaking hand. The 5-year-old child possessed a profound, ancient wisdom. He reached down and placed his tiny, freezing palm directly over Kaelin's bloodied knuckles. "My mother said you would come back," Leo whispered, his voice steady and remarkably calm. "She said you were just lost in the dark." A heartbreaking sob tore through Kaelin's chest. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the freezing dirt at Maren's torn boots, complete surrendering his soul, his empire, and his life to the woman he had wronged. Maren finally let out a long, trembling breath, the 5 years of solid ice around her heart finally beginning to melt. Maren looked down at the shattered king weeping at her feet. She did not offer him a warm smile, nor did she immediately erase the 5 years of brutal agony with a single touch. Instead, she reached down, her rough, scarred hands gently lifting Kaelin's chin until his glowing silver eyes met hers. "You will not wash my feet, Kaelin," Maren stated, her voice resonating with an unshakable, quiet authority. "You will stand beside me. You will rebuild what your arrogance destroy, and you will show our son what it means to be a true king." It was not a complete absolution, but it was a beginning. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Kaelin nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. He rose to his feet, immediately stripping off his heavy, fur-lined royal cloak and wrapping it securely around Marin's shivering shoulders, before carefully lifting Leo into his massive arms. Their return to the Ashveil kingdom was nothing short of historic. The moment they crossed the royal borders, the ancient magic of the land recognized its true Luna and its rightful heir. The skies cleared, and the dormant winter gave way to a sudden, breathtaking spring. The entire Ashveil court, the very same wolves who had watched Marin walk away in disgrace 5 years ago, now fell to their knees in absolute awe and submission. She was no longer the fragile liability. When Kaelin placed the heavy silver crown upon her head in the center of the throne room, he did not stand above her. He knelt at the base of her throne, publicly swearing his eternal loyalty and absolute devotion. Marin ruled Ashveil not just as a queen, but as a legendary survivor, proving that the most terrifying power in the world is not the ability to destroy, but the strength to endure and the grace to forgive. What an unbelievable journey of heartbreak and ultimate redemption. But now, I have to ask you a question. If you were Marin, would you have forgiven the Alpha King so easily? Or would you have made him suffer a little longer in the freezing mud to pay for those 5 years of misery? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you love this story of a hidden heir and a fiercely protective mother, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow audiobook lovers, and subscribe to Wolf Enigma. Do not forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling chapter of our dark, supernatural romance tales. Until next time, stay wild and beware the shadows of the pack.